Recording in progress. Somnath sir, should I start?
Hello, yes, Rajib, you can start.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. All the esteemed teachers, my seniors and friends. Today, I'm going to discuss about the WHO recent recommendation for care of preterm or LBW infant. It will be moderated by Dr. Bijan Saha, our Associate Professor sir, and Somnath sir. We are from the Department of Neonatology, IPGMER, Kolkata. This recent recommendation was published very recently on the 15th of November 2022. Why this recommendation is important? I will first give you the overview of this discussion, the background, what is new in this recommendation, the comparison of this recommendation with the earlier recommendation that was published in 2015, and what is the scope of further research after the publication of this recommendation, the summary, and finally the take-home message. The incidence of preterm birth worldwide was 15.2 million in 2019, occurring in 11% of live births. Globally, preterm birth accounts for 36.1% of neonatal deaths and 17.7% of deaths among children younger than 5 years. Estimated 0.94 million deaths worldwide were due to preterm birth in 2019. So, can gauge the importance of this guideline. The survival of these preterm neonates lags behind that of full-term infants, and specialized care is needed for these vulnerable infants. Now, three important previous guidelines that were published by WHO were the feeding guidelines in 2011, then the recommendations for management of common childhood conditions in 2012, and the WHO recommendations on interventions to improve preterm birth outcomes in 2015. And these were the three major guidelines that were published by WHO in relation to preterm newborns. And the current guidelines add upon the previous guidelines. Not all points have been touched upon. Most of the points that were previously published are still there. And since the publication of these guidelines, the last one being in 2015, substantial new evidence has emerged, and hence the need for this current recommendation. So the WHO, this recommendation was published in November 15, 2022. The priority questions were based upon the following criteria: values and preferences of families, whether that particular question had a public health importance, whether new evidence was available for that question, and whether the questions that were not addressed by existing WHO guidelines or those questions that needs update. So the framework on the PICO format, interventions broadly divided into 3 classes: preventive and promotive care, care for complications, family involvement and support, intervention period from birth to 24 months of age, comparators were usual care or no intervention, period again from birth to 24 months of age, critical outcomes like mortality, morbidity, growth, neurodevelopment at latest follow-up, and also other relevant outcomes were assessed. Outcome period was unrestricted. Setting, where it is important because even home setting was assessed, not only healthcare facility settings. And subgroups, the subgroups of less than 32 week gestation or VLBW infants were assessed in this recommendation. Targeted audience for these recommendations being the national and subnational public health policymakers, the implementers and managers of maternal, newborn, and child health programs, the healthcare facility managers, the supervisors, instructors for in-service training, health workers, midwives, nurses, neonatologists, general practitioners, and community health workers, NGOs, professional societies involved in planning, academic staff involved in research, and those involved in the education of parents. Ultimately, almost everyone is the target of these recommendations. The guidelines were developed as per the rules laid down in the WHO handbook for guideline development. For quantitative assessment, grade approach was used, and for qualitative assessment, grade for qualitative assessment was used. The recommendations can be broadly divided into 3 categories. That is a strong recommendation, it could be a conditional recommendation, or it could be a good practice statement. A strong recommendation, if the intervention is applicable to all preterm or LBW infants, it should be phrased as is recommended, not recommended, should receive, or should not receive. Conditional, if the intervention is recommended under certain specific conditions, and it should be shared decision making with the parents of the newborn, or in certain populations or settings, this recommendation has its importance. And if it is a conditional recommendation, it should be phrased as may be considered. And a good practice statement is one where the intervention is obviously beneficial, but there is very little or no good quality evidence. So for this particular recommendation, 17 new systematic reviews were commissioned and 21 additional existing systematic reviews and meta-analysis were assessed. And the DECIDE framework was used for finally laying down the guidelines. It has 9 core domains like benefits, harms, balance of effects, certainty, values, acceptability, resources, feasibility, and equity. So the contributors to this guideline were the WHO steering group, the guideline development group, the external review group, the evidence synthesis team, and external partners and observers. So the evidence and recommendations. The recommendations covers the care of the preterm or LBW infant in any healthcare facility or community setting from birth to 24 months of age unless otherwise indicated. These recommendations are complementary to existing WHO guidelines for antenatal, intrapartum, and postnatal care. So the guidelines which are already existing still exist, and these guidelines add a few new points or update a few old areas. So there are total 25 recommendations and one good practice statement. 11 of these recommendations are new and 14 are updated, and a good practice statement is new. There are 11 strong recommendations and 14 conditional recommendations. So what are the various scopes of these new recommendations? It could be broadly divided into three categories: preventive and promotive care, care for complications, and family involvement and support. There are total 16 recommendations in preventive and promotive care, 6 recommendations in care for complications, and 3 recommendations and 1 good practice statement for family involvement and support. As can be seen in the right side of the right diagram, it can be seen that not all the points have been touched upon. For preventive and promotive care in this current guideline, the recommendations are for kangaroo mother care, micronutrients, feeding, probiotics, and emollients. For care for complications, CPAP and methyl gentins have been touched upon. And for family involvement and support, family involvement in routine care, family support, home visits, and parental leave and entitlements have been, the recommendations are there for these particular points. Now coming to the first broad category, that is preventive and promotive care. First one, KMC. This is an updated recommendation. It is recommended as routine care for all preterm or LBW infants, that is less than 2.5 kg or less than 37 weeks. KMC can be initiated in the healthcare facility or at home and should be given for 8 to 24 hours per day. In fact, as many hours as possible. This is a strong recommendation and with a high certainty evidence. The point to note in this particular recommendation is that in this recommendation, the recommendations are also there for home KMC. This home KMC recommendation was not existent in the previous recommendations. In the remarks regarding this recommendation, it can be given at home or at the healthcare facility. Whenever possible, the mother should provide KFC. If mother is not available, then other family members, father or partners can provide the KFC. The next recommendation regarding KMC, which is important and new, that is immediate KMC. It is KMC that should be started as soon as possible after birth. That is also a strong recommendation with high certainty evidence. At home, immediate KMC should be given to infants who have no danger signs. It is ideally initiated immediately after birth or after initial resuscitation if required. And at healthcare facilities, immediate KMC can be initiated even before the infant is clinically stable, bearing few exceptions like if the infant is unable to breathe spontaneously after resuscitation, if the infant is not hemodynamically stable and is in shock, or if the infant needs mechanical ventilation. So bearing these three exceptions, the new recommendations state that immediate KMC can be started in all preterm infants, even if the baby is not clinically stable. Now regarding organization of care, stable infants, KMC can be done in postnatal wards, smaller ones in step downs on special care nurseries, and those infants that have complications, KMC can be started in ICUs And those infants that need ICUs should be managed in special units where the family members, the mother, father, can be with their preterm or LBW infants 24 hours a day. So a policy of zero separation is encouraged, and concepts like maternal NICUs and couplet care units are encouraged in this new recommendation. So these maternal NICUs and couplet care units are there in the developed nations. So these new WHO recommendations encourage these concepts even in low middle income countries. And the families should have access to beds, food, bathing, and all the necessary amenities throughout the infants' hospitals. However, the point to note is that community-initiated KMC and KMC for unstable babies have not been implemented outside research settings, and global coverage of these concepts still remains low. So this is the summary of the evidence where the PICO format has been used. And the justification for these recommendations for KMC, evidence of large benefits regarding mortality, decreased infection, decreased hypothermia, increased weight gain, and increased breastfeeding. For immediate KMC, evidence of large benefits exists for decreased mortality, decreased hypothermia, decreased infection, and increased weight gain. And regarding the DECIDE framework, for immediate KMC, the feasibility and the resources that will be required for immediate KMC is still a matter of debate, but WHO recommendations state that it should be highly encouraged. So this is a table showing the differences between the recommendations that were given by WHO in 2015 and the current recommendations. As can be seen here, previous recommendations stated that KMC is recommended for birth weight less than 2 kg and should be initiated in healthcare facilities. The new recommendations state that it should be recommended for all preterm or low birth weight infants that is less than 2.5 kg, and it should be initiated not only in the healthcare facilities but even at home. And concept of continuous KMC at least minimum for 8 to 14 hours is recommended. And the immediate KMC concept is a new one, which was not there in the previous recommendation. So for again, the previous recommendations was that if a baby cannot be on KMC because of any reason, then that baby should be cared for in a thermoneutral environment, either under radiant warmer or in incubators. No such recommendation or no such update is there for this in this current edition. And there was insufficient evidence on the effectiveness of plastic bag or wraps in providing thermal care immediately after birth, but no recommendations for that particular area in this WHO recommendation. But we all know that the new NRP guidelines recommend that plastic bags or wraps should be used immediately for babies who are born at less than 32 weeks gestation. Probably that will be coming in the forthcoming WHO guidelines for resuscitation. Now, next area is mother's own milk. Mother's own milk is recommended for feeding of all preterm infants even less than 32 weeks gestation. The reasons behind it being formula milks do not contain the antibodies and the immune modulators or primers that are needed to protect the immature gastrointestinal tract. And consistent harm from infant formula regarding NEC and infection are the reasons and behind this strong recommendation. And the mothers should be encouraged and supported before and after birth to provide their own breast milk, including colostrum for their infants. So this is not a new recommendation. In fact, this recommendation is already there. Regarding the next area, that is donor human milk, when mother's own milk is not available, donor human milk may be considered. So that is applicable for all preterm infants, irrespective of gestational age and weight. but it is a conditional recommendation, and it should be done on a shared decision making with parents. The parents should be involved in the decision making whether donor's human milk will be used or not, because they may be having their own issues, or they may not agree to use milk from another mother. The potential harm of NEC from infant formula is much more clinically important than a benefit of increased growth from infant formula, and why that is the reason why donor human milk is preferred over infant formula. However, safe and affordable milk banking facilities are needed, and infrastructure should be strong enough to provide donor human milk. So for donor infant formula, there are evidence of moderate harms like NEC and feed intolerance, and the reason for which the donor human milk is preferred over infant formula. However, there are issues regarding resources and feasibility, but if milk banks are available, then donor human milk is preferred. If both of them are not available, then nutrient enriched preterm formula is the recommendation, and the guideline development group was not able to recommend a particular type of preterm formula because insufficient evidence to make a recommendations for infants who were born at 32 to 36 weeks gestation and with a birth weight of 1.5 to 2.4 kg. And in this particular age group or gestation, their standard term formula or nutrient enriched preterm formula may be considered depending on clinical judgment. However, for less than 32 weeks gestation, there's new recommendations strongly favor nutrient enriched preterm formula.
Class.
So justification for this preterm formula over term formula, evidence of small benefit regarding increased in-hospital weight, head circumference, neurodevelopment, and there was no evidence of harm when preterm formula was compared with term formula. Regarding multi-component fortification of milk, it is not routinely recommended for all preterm or LBW infants, but may be considered for very preterm, that is less than 32 weeks gestation, or VLBW babies who are less than 1.5 kg. It is a conditional recommendation. The guideline developmental group suggests that specifically formulated for those fortifiers which are specifically formulated for preterm infants should be used, and the initiation and duration should be based on clinical judgment. However, in most of the trials, the participants received the fortification when the amount of milk that was consumed by the infant was at least 100 ml per kg per day, or when full enteral feeds, typically 150 ml per kg per day, was reached, and the fortifier was provided until a body weight of 1.8 to 2 kg, or until a pre-specified postmenstrual age of 34 to 36 weeks, or until discharge home from hospital was assessed in all the trials that were included in the systematic reviews. So that could be the guiding factors behind deciding when to start and when to stop these fortifiers. But WHO in their recommendation do not give any particular recommendation regarding starting or stopping of fortifiers. So there was justification was there because evidence of small benefits regarding in-hospital weight gain, length and head circumference, and evidence of harms were uncertain when multi-component fortification was compared with unfortified breast milk. Now, regarding early initiation of enteral feed, so it should be fed as early as possible from the first day after birth. Those who can breastfeed should breastfeed. Those who cannot breastfeed should be given express mother's own milk. And if mother's own milk is not available, then donor human milk should be used. So that is the same thing. So careful consideration is needed in unstable babies. In human milk is not available, infant can be fed formula as this is preferable to delayed initiation of enteral feeding and the use of parenteral nutrition. There was no difference in effectiveness when volumes were restricted, so recommendation was not made on restricting the volume of feed. Regarding responsive and scheduled feeding, in healthcare facilities, scheduled feeding may be considered rather than responsive feeding based on infant cues in those infants who were born before 34 weeks gestation. There were harms from responsive feeding like poor weight gain, and that outweighed the benefits like decreased length of hospital stay. Recommendations could not be made for those who were born more than 34 weeks gestation because there was lack of data. The current guidelines suggest 2 to 3 hourly scheduled feeding in all hospitalized infants less than 34 weeks gestation. Responsive feeding based on infant cues requires sensitivity and careful observation of baby's behavior, and hence requires more commonly implemented in settings where their NICUs are well equipped with staff and infrastructure is there. Regarding fast and slow advancement of feeding, those who need to be fed by an alternative feeding method, their feed volume should be increased by maximum of 30 ml per kg per day. However, careful consideration is needed in those with congenital anomalies and birth asphyxia because all the trials excluded these babies, and maximum trial compared fast advancement with increments of 30 to 40 ml versus slow advancement of 15 to 25. So the guideline development group took the conservative value of 30 ml per kg per day in this particular recommendation. Now, regarding the duration of exclusive feeding, it is the same, that is, it should be exclusively breastfed until 6 months of age. However, exclusive breastfeeding till 6 months of age has its own issues, and there are studies that have reported the difficulties with exclusive breastfeeding till 6 months of age in those mothers who have been discharged home because of specific difficulties